uh, that is providing some of the support for us to carry forth this webinar. And we're hoping that we will continue on with a series. That said, I want to move on to Dom. And I can't tell, it's hard to tell you what a great pleasure it is for me to introduce to you one of our very own, Dominic Noce, who is a graduate of Newburyport High School and the Gulf of Maine Institute, known sometimes as GOMI. And Dom is here to talk about something that's been near and dear to his heart, I think, from birth. And he's got a wonderful message and some beautiful experiences. And for those of you who are parents and you have some youngsters, but that could be anywhere from K through 12, and they're in the background, pull them in, because I think this might be an interesting thing for them to see as well. And Dominic has several messages. One is the message of he's the voice of the large predator tonight, because like many animals, they have no voice. So he's going to carry forth about large predators and their significance and their importance in the whole concept of biodiversity. And he's going to talk about how we need to preserve and understand. And understand is probably the thing to get underlined when we're talking about large predators. I think the other message that Dom is going to have for us is follow your dream. If you have a dream as a young person and you feel it deeply inside you, let no one discourage you. And that has been Dominic's North Star. And that's carried him forward to the work that he's going to talk to you about. The third is the importance I cannot underscore anymore, is the importance of young children, K through 12, having experiences that are significant and important with the natural world. That's the way they're going to understand it. That's the way they're going to love it. And that's the way they're going to preserve it. With that said, I'm going to pass it on to you, Dominic. I know that you're going to carry forth.
Well, thanks for the introduction, JT. It was really great to hear from you. And thank you to the Memorial Library for having me and inviting me for this presentation. So my name is Dominic Noce, and I am currently working in what we call wildlife biology, which is taking the science of the natural world, particularly within the animal kingdom and sometimes at the landscape level for the entire ecosystem, and applying that to conservation and management issues and conflicts. So to give a background, I graduated from the University of Montana in 2021 with my degree in wildlife biology. And the University of Montana was a wonderful experience. It is the #1 ranked wildlife program in the entirety of North America. So not just in the United States, but even including Canada, Mexico, and Central America. And I am currently working as a carnivore technician for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation in the Eastern Adirondack Mountains of New York. So that has been wonderful. And what really got me started was a big leap of this was in high school, and that wouldn't have been possible without John Terry and the Gulf of Maine Institute having such a extracurricular involvement at Newburyport High School. And I really cannot thank GOMI enough for giving me the opportunity to really pursue something that I was passionate about. And what I was passionate about was predators. And predators are hard to study. So you have to really think about different methods that you can use. And there's also the fact that at this point, I was a 15, 16-year-old high school student and not every big scientific method is going to be available to just one person, such as myself. So this pictured here is what we call a camera trap or a trail camera. And camera traps have been a technology that has really revolutionized a lot of wildlife science for rare, shy, cryptic species over the years. And it's become a huge tool that not only was I able to start using in science at this early level, but it's a skill that has carried on pretty much consistently throughout the rest of my career. So I can't stress enough how important this technology was, and to be able to learn how to utilize it at such a young age. And the target species for a lot of this work in the beginning was the eastern coyote. So this is actually in the maritime forest of Parker River National Wildlife Refuge in Plum Island. Gulf of Maine Institute has some pretty strong connections with the refuge, and there's a lot of different project partnerships that youth are involved in with invasive species and endangered bird protection. But I was really interested with carnivores. So thanks to GOMI and the refuge manager at the time, Bill Peterson, as well as the wildlife biologist, Nancy Powell, I was able to start monitoring the refuge's coyote population. And so we had this one resident breeding pair that you've seen here in this video that I've been repeating. So we've got the female here, and then that's her male partner, and they mate for life. And from doing this long-term study, I got to monitor them throughout their entire cycle throughout the year, and that includes reproduction. So we were seeing new pups being born, we were seeing those pups grow up and eventually, as we assume, to disperse. And so this is a really solid way of gaining that connection and really pushing forward that, yes, I am in the field doing this type of work, and this is the type of work that I definitely want to continue doing for the rest of my career. And so not only did you have coyotes, but you had tons of other animals that you were picking up, and it kind of became a general carnivore project. But of course, the coyote is the largest predator that's left on the landscape. And the coyotes in Massachusetts and in the northeastern United States are quite unique in the sense that the coyote is not native to this part of the world. It came here after the wolves were exterminated because wolves were limiting their population growth. And they came and settled as there were no wolves, and they were able to move freely. However, you still had some remaining wolves on the landscape, maybe one or two individuals, and those individuals bred with a couple of the coyotes. So there is a little bit of wolf genetics in the coyote population. And so we see that in their slightly larger size, and you have some of these fantastic coat colorations that are very wolf-like that we saw in our resident male. We also had some other carnivores too. The other most prominent is the fisher, which is an animal that has quite an exaggerated reputation in the suburbs of the United States. Many people call them fisher cats and talk about them from their characteristic screams, and neither of those things are true. This is a very large member of the weasel family, and a lot of that screaming that you hear comes from other animals, but people have for some reason decided to attribute it and single out this particular species, which isn't the case. But again, fantastic creatures. And while coyotes are quite a bit more shy, these guys are definitely way more inquisitive, and we saw that with the cameras. I had quite a few dents and scratches in the cameras from some curious fishers, for sure. So that was quite interesting to see, and it taught me a lot about how to do camera placement and put out my attractants and everything. So then went off to university, and I was learning wildlife biology in Montana, and I was taking lots of extra initiative, always assisting and volunteering with different graduate students to increase my skill set, and going to different talks and presentations and proposals and defenses to really understand how wildlife biology really worked at that career stage. And from that, combined with my 2 years of working on coyotes at Park River, I was able to get my first big paid position away from home the summer of 2019. So pay no attention to this date because this camera was not set up correctly. It was not mine. It was one of my friends, but we were working on a black bear monitoring project in northern Tennessee and southern Kentucky for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And so camera traps were not a part of this particular study, but you can see these barbed wire strands. And what the goal of this study was to get density. So to find out how many individual black bears are in per square unit of space. And to do that, a really great way is to get DNA samples. So with black bears, they're an animal that has a very high food drive. And so by having this bait station surrounded by this barbed wire, a black bear would walk through, some of the fur would get snagged on the barbed wire, and we would go out and we would check it and we would collect it and send that into a lab for DNA analysis. So that way the university, as well as the state agencies in Kentucky and Tennessee, could know how many black bears there were. And so that was a very interesting work. It was my first time really doing big independent work far away from home. And it was definitely a fantastic experience that helped increase my skill set as well and further cement myself as doing carnivore work specifically. Then in the spring semester of 2020, I had a very fantastic opportunity where I was a fellowship member to participate in a field intensive study abroad in Botswana's Okavango Delta, which is a World Heritage Site listed by UNESCO and one of the most biodiverse regions left on the planet when it comes to not just carnivores, but megafauna in general. And so Round River had been working in this region of northern Botswana for quite a few years, helping and assisting with local communities to survey their wildlife populations and be able to make their own management decisions as the political climate in the country had changed. So one of the major projects that we were working on every day was we would go out on these long 20-kilometer drives and we would be doing something called a distance sampling transect. And so whenever we saw any sort of mammal, from the smallest antelopes, which this is a steenbok. It's about the size of a deer fawn. The locals call them pudu-hudu, which I think is just way more fun to say. So that's what I call them. All the way to the largest elephants. And we would record how far were they from the road, how many individuals, male, female, what are the ages. And we would collect all that information. And when you collect this information long-term, you're able to figure out if there's any sort of trends that are happening in all these different herbivore populations, which is really important for understanding management decisions and trying to figure out key problems for the local communities to then work on. So while we were doing this, we were also training a lot of locals that had grown up in the bush that were my age so that they could be doing this long-term and eventually not need outside assistance. We're also, of course, opportunistically assessing the carnivore population. So as I said, carnivores are very secretive. It's best to do this with camera traps, but if you get that visual data on a transect, there's no reason not to record it. So this is one of my favorite carnivores found in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the painted dog or African wild dog. These are highly endangered carnivores. They only occupy a fraction of their former range. But here in the Okavango Delta, it's become a stronghold for the last remaining African wild dogs. And so we had some fantastic wild dog sightings. And we were also collaborating with BirdLife Botswana to collect data whenever we saw threatened or endangered birds, like this martial eagle, which is one of the largest eagle species on the continent and another favorite of mine. But we were able to take all this data that we were working on and really have the opportunity to answer some of our own questions. And a big reason for a lot of this data is that Botswana had a hunting ban initiated. That was a very political move. And I think the year before we had arrived, there was a new president that decided to lift the ban also for political reasons. So as scientists, we wanted to figure out, well, what does the science say? And so we had been doing these ground transects around river had been since 2014. So there was a lot of data to work with. And so me and one of my colleagues, who I still am in touch with, we decided to look at that data for 3 antelopes, for 3 ungulate species, the impala, which is one of the most common antelope species on that landscape, as well as another popular antelope, the greater kudu, though it's found in less number, but still quite common. And finally, on the largest end, the Cape buffalo. And all of these 3 species were some of the animals that had their hunting bans lifted. And in Africa, it's mostly trophy hunting, which means that people are selecting for larger mature males. So we were analyzing what is the ratio of mature males to the rest of the population in these different areas that we're surveying over this time frame. And does it make sense? Give that information to the community so they can decide at the individual level if they want to allow hunting concessions in the areas that they're managing themselves. So unfortunately, this wonderful experience got cut short because, as I said, this was February of 2020, and we all know what happened in March with the world shutting down. So we got evacuated back to the United States, and that was very safe. Got back home safely, much to my mother's delight. And I was luckily able to secure an internship back in Montana at Glacier National Park, where a Washington State University student was analyzing the populations of Canada lynx in the park. So here we go back to camera traps. Canada lynx are a very elusive species. And so we ended up setting 170 camera traps across the entire park, which was awesome because half of the park was closed for the entire summer due to the pandemic. So you were getting to hike in these areas that would normally be swarming with crowds of tourists, and you're the only one there looking for these elusive lynx populations. And as I said with the coyote project, when you're setting up camera traps in this way, you're not just getting your target species, you get a lot of bycatch. So we were getting other large cats like these mountain lions, and even bigger predators like the grizzly bears. There's a lot of grizzly bears in Glacier National Park. Bigger still, you've got lots of large herbivores. Glacier National Park is a fantastic habitat for bull moose. Saw lots of moose even just walking around, not just on the camera traps. And even some really rare species like the wolverine, a species that very few people could go their entire lifetime and never see. And specifically in Glacier National Park, the rarest animal being the North American porcupine. And we actually documented more porcupines than the Park Service was expecting to find within the park, which was great news. It shows that this population is really rebounding, unlike in several other parts of the country where they're doing quite well. And with this information and the fact that this project had been going on before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic, Washington State University was able to use that information to not only look at lynx occupancy in the park like they had originally planned, but to also look at how the pandemic and the human activity within the park had changed any wildlife movement. So collecting this data can then come back and you can have some unique questions to ask depending on how situations arise during your field season. So that's why it's always great to collect lots of different data so you can answer some of those more important questions and give those questions to people that are willing to analyze your data. So then I graduated in spring of 2021, as I said, and I immediately got a job with Utah State University looking at cougars or mountain lions. And this project was analyzing radio collar data from mountain lions in the Manti Mountains in central Utah. And we were looking at kill sites. So with these radio collars, we would find the kill sites that cats had made, and we'd go and investigate what had happened, how much of the carcass was eaten, what scavengers showed up, and if it was fresh, like in this situation, you'd set up a camera trap and the cat would come back and you'd be able to observe how it was feeding, what it was feeding on, if a bear would come and kick it off. So there was a lot of very important and very interesting information from this project. A lot of tough field work. You're following cats, and cats don't like to be followed, and they'll use some of the most rugged terrain imaginable. But it was very, very rewarding to collect a lot of this data. And not only were we looking at kill sites, but we were also looking at kitten survival. So you can see that cat in the first video, that wasn't fully grown. She's now down here, and this is her mother. And so her mother was the one that we were really tracking, but we wanted to keep tabs on how well are these kittens doing? Is mom able to keep these kittens fed until they're ready to strike out on their own at 2.5 years old? So really rewarding project, and learned a whole lot about not just carnivores, but very large carnivores in particular.
What happened?
So now, as I said at the beginning, I am currently working for New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And most of my current work right now has been with bobcats. It's a partnership with Cornell University, where Cornell University and parts of the state want to look into bobcat populations in the Adirondacks, and mostly even statewide throughout the entire upstate region. So we have been doing different types of method testing. So camera traps, even though camera traps aren't going to be used to collect this particular data and this type of idea, what we were doing is we were testing this particular method to see if it was even feasible to get the data that we wanted. So this is a variation of that hair snare method that I had done with black bears in Kentucky, where instead of barbed wire with a bear that's a much more food-driven animal, we were using and testing these cubbies that have gum brushes on the inside that you can see, those long strands pointing out. Those are gum brushes designed to catch the hair of the bobcat as it walks through, and we were using different types of scent lure to attract the bobcat in, because bobcats are not very food driven. They're more territorial or scent driven as a group of animals. So this was something that we were attempting to try. It doesn't seem to have worked, so we're back on the drawing board on that now. But that's part of wildlife management, is that animals don't behave the way that you expect them to or the way that you want to, and you have to innovate new methods to try and see if you can figure out the best way to get the data that you want to collect. And then also working with even smaller carnivores. So across the East Coast, especially down in the Southeast, there's been some concerns about being able to survey weasel populations appropriately. So we helped participate in a study looking at different weasel populations and seeing if there were particular ways to attract them to camera traps and particular baits that would be more effective. So later down the line, there could be a big region-wide or statewide survey to be done to more accurately understand what the weasel population is. And so in New York, you have 3 different weasel species. Specifically in the Adirondacks, where I was working, you had 2. This is the short-tailed weasel, also called a stoat or an ermine, and they're the most common of the 2. But we did also have long-tailed weasels that we were able to capture on this field method testing that we conducted over the winter. So now now that I've talked about my personal experiences, I want to bring this back to predators as a whole. And I think that the artwork pictured here is a pretty good representation of the general history and perception that humans have had of carnivores over a long period of time. And it's a very negative and very monstrous depiction of these animals, and it's always seen in a very negative light, because these are animals that are carnivorous, they kill for a living, and that can lead to conflicts with people or even endangerment of human life. And certainly with science and the way things have progressed with zoology, people have learned a lot more on what day-to-day these animals' lives are really like. But even today, when you go on the internet, much of what you see on there is still very gravitated towards aggressive interactions and focusing on the killing and the fighting. And yes, these are parts of the animal's life, but the animal has a lot more to its life. And I have proof of that in the interactions that I've had with the large predators that I've seen, such as these painted dogs and cougars, that they have very complex social lives. They raise their young, they're good parents, and they have to conserve energy a lot of the time. Cats spend a great deal of the day just sleeping. And these are all big and important parts of their lives. And it's honestly things that they're doing more often than killing and fighting and all the aggressive interactions that entertainment and the media put to the forefront of these animals' lives. And it gives people a very warped perception of what these animals are actually like. And the reason that I find this to be an issue is we're seeing unprecedented range reductions in animals. So this range map is for the African lion, which is an animal that everybody knows is synonymous with Africa. There's still the belief that this is an animal that's very widespread throughout the continent. And I think, as you can all see from this map, the blue regions are where we know there are still lions. And compared to the red, that is their historic range, they're not left in a whole lot of areas. Yeah, tigers are the same way, but the decline of tigers is a very famous story, and it's made a lot of the other big cats declines go unnoticed. Leopards have also had a very severe range reduction. They've lost over 3/4 of their historic range. And so we are losing these animals really fast. Even mountain lions used to be in Massachusetts. And even still today, we see a lot of interactions and policy that still push this narrative, and that carnivores aren't welcome and that they're bad. And even though this poster talks about how this legislation is not yet passed, I will inform you that this is outdated. It has passed. The governor of Utah did sign this. So those mountain lions, that mother and that kitten that I was working with in the Central Mountains, even back then when I was working there 2 years ago, the quotas were unsustainably high. These mountain lions were facing very high amounts of human hunting pressure, and not much done to alleviate that. It's gotten even worse to now there are no restrictions on being able to kill mountain lions in the state of Utah. So that's all from people understanding negative sides and bad sides, and that these animals are scary and that they kill things. But what about good things? What good things do carnivores do? Well, they're scary and they kill things, and that brings a lot of benefits, especially when it comes to other animals and plants. So from this great poster prepared here, this is work that has been done extensively, that when a mountain lion kills a deer, a lot of that nutrients, they go into the soil. That's great nutrition for allowing plants to grow. There's insects and other decomposers that are feeding on that material that the mountain lion doesn't eat. You have other scavengers, tons of different birds and foxes and weasels, and even bears will come in and they'll feed on the carcass. And even some of those insects and those decomposers, those are food in turn for songbirds. So yes, this is an animal that is killing and eating another animal for a living, but that process creates so many opportunities for so many other animals to really take advantage of, and increases their welfare and puts more animals really on the landscape. And there was actually a recent article that was written that really documented just how much material these mountain lions are providing for the soil and providing for these scavengers. And it amounts to one mountain lion is providing a blue whale's worth of nutrients to the soil every single year. Blue whale is an animal that is so big you can't comprehend how big it is. And just one mountain lion over 1 year is putting that much nutrition back into the environment. And there's a lot more than one mountain lion out there. So these guys are really critical for nutrient cycling and keeping the soils rich and allowing these plants to grow, which then benefits all the other animals in the area. And you think about just how much with agriculture that people have to buy so much in fertilizers and spend so much money and have all these different innovations to keep the soil full of nutrients, whereas these guys just do it passively by existing. And they provide so much of it just on their own. And we see this when apex predators get removed from an environment, the diversity goes down. Yellowstone is the famous example in this regard. When the wolves were wiped out, you saw a dominance of elk, you saw a dominance of coyotes, you saw a lot of other species becoming either absent or very reduced in range, including beavers, which are a very important ecosystem engineer and create great habitat for so many other species. Beavers weren't able to survive because the elk were feeding on all of the young saplings that were near the water's edge. And once you got the wolves back in that environment, being near the water's edge, when you're an elk and there's wolves, that's a scary situation. You don't want to be there. This is something that we call the landscape of fear or the ecology of fear. And it affects where an animal is going to move because it knows that this is a high risk area to be killed by a predator. And people have probably experienced some of these same things. When I walk around in Southern Africa or in Glacier National Park where I know there's grizzly bears, I walk differently than I would when I'm walking down the paved street in West Newbury, Massachusetts, because I'm less worried about those types of things and I adjust my behavior accordingly. It's the same thing here. And so it's not always just about killing the animal, but just by being on the landscape, you're going to alter how different animals move. And that's still going to create different opportunities for more animals and more plants to be on the landscape and create a healthier, more biodiverse ecosystem. So that relates to other species, but what about us? You know, we're humans. A lot of us are living in areas that just aren't that biodiverse. There's lots of asphalt, there's lots of concrete. What does this matter to us? And so this is one of my favorite things about ecology, one of my favorite ecological concepts, and it's called ecosystem services. And basically what it is it's just what an environment provides for humanity that is very beneficial. And this could be something as simple as a tree that creates fruit. People benefit from that fruit because it's a source of food. Predators, through scaring other animals and killing other animals, they provide ecosystem services that are very beneficial to people. I touched on it a little bit with nutrient cycling and how that increases agricultural output, but also by killing pest species that are really hard to control. We see that across the globe. Also, when animals die, if there's no predators or there's no scavengers to feed on those carcasses just sit there and they accumulate bacteria and dangerous bacteria, and it can cause disease outbreaks. The reason that Zoom has become so prevalent is because of the COVID-19 pandemic that came from a disease that was passed by animals not being in great conditions and meat being able to be left out to spoil. And that's all dangerous. But predators and scavengers will help clean that up, and they'll actually make this area healthier. And they also will kill and they'll kill and scare off species that are arguably more dangerous. And this is something that's hard for people to comprehend, but when it comes to predators, they aren't that aggressive because they have to be careful. when you make a living hunting and killing other animals, you need to be in perfect body condition all the time. If you have a small injury, that can be fatal. And so what we usually see is that actually herbivores are far more aggressive. And if we look at herbivores like bison and moose and hippos, those are the animals that have much higher kill counts on human life than things like lions and hyenas and cougars and bears. And for a specific example, it doesn't even have to be from aggression. Deer killed loads of people in vehicle incidents. And having cougars and wolves on the landscape, it's going to reduce your deer population. And that's going to potentially save human lives. It's going to save on insurance money. And so all of these benefits happen just by the animal being on the landscape. You don't have to pay for anything. It just needs to be there. So to have some more specific examples, this is one that I really like because it ties a lot of these things together. So Mumbai in India is the most heavily populated city in the entire world. There's so many people living there. But there's a small population of leopards that have become isolated from a national park that is in the center of the city. And so several leopards have to roam outside of the park to feed because it gets too crowded and the leopards don't really have anywhere else to go. Mumbai also has an astronomically high population of feral dogs, as you can see here, 96,000 dogs. And these dogs are unvaccinated, they're unowned, and they will attack people, and they are a major vector for rabies. And rabies is a big problem in Mumbai. And you have 429 people dying of rabies. Well, these leopards, despite the sensational stories of leopards attacking people and the famous man-eating leopards, these leopards in Mumbai are mostly eating dogs. And so by allowing these leopards to go into the city at night and hunt these dogs, it saves a great amount of money on trying to manage these feral dog populations. It does save human lives, and it's a great benefit because it's good economically, it's good for human life, and it's preventing disease risk. And those things all come together from just allowing this one animal to share at least some space with people. And I think that that's a fantastic message, particularly for an area as urban and densely populated as Mumbai. So what about locally? Locally, we don't have true large predators. We don't have any megafaunal carnivores left. They're all extirpated. We do have coyotes, and in some areas there are bobcats, which usually are medium-sized predators, but in these environments, they are the top order carnivore because there's no larger predator to enforce that top-down interaction. Well, what do coyotes and bobcats do? Well, they eat a lot of rats, and they'll also kill a lot of raccoons. And those are two species that carry a lot of diseases. They can cause a lot of problems. They can cause a lot of conflict, and they live at high densities, and they're very hard for people to effectively control. And people will spend millions of dollars on trying to get rid of rats and raccoons, and they'll use poisons that affect everything in the ecosystem. But for the amount of effort and the amount of technology that's out there, they don't do as good of a job as a predator does. And so having these larger predators and allowing these larger predators to share their spaces, it's going to allow them to take advantage of these prey and not allow them to be comfortable and reduce their populations and keep conflicts down to a minimum and reduce the disease risk that comes with these pest type of species. So really understanding what the animal does and how it behaves and how it moves around and how it interacts with other animals, you can find a whole deal of benefits that these animals can provide. And that's what's really important about biodiversity. It's what's really important about predators in particular. And it's why we need to open up and understand what's around us. And that's going to be kind of my final tie-in, where I do a lot of educational talks just like this one. This was with a green team in Lawrence, and I was explaining to them all the coyote stuff that I had been doing and showing them pictures and videos of coyotes and fisher and how they move around the landscape. And just by showing people this visual data and this real-time data of how these animals actually interact and how they move in their environment, it allows you to really understand and eventually appreciate what they're doing instead of focusing on the negatives and being nervous or being upset that they're around, and really getting a great idea of everything, how everything is connected and how everything is important. So that is the end of my talk. I think this is the perfect end for us. So I guess we will open it up to Q&A. Oh, you're muted, Corinne.
Yep, sorry. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. I think, watching, so much forest disappear and seeing, foxes, well, I don't, just different animals displaced and in our spaces. And it's important to remember that they're so important, we need them there. So thank you so much. Did anyone have any questions for Dominic? You might have answered everyone's questions. No, truly, it was really informative.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. That was such an interesting presentation, really informative. I'm sitting here with my daughter, who's a 7th grader in Newburyport. I was wondering if you foresee any chance of bringing back large predators that could reduce the deer population and therefore reduce the tick population and tick-borne diseases.
Oh, well, this is actually great timing because yesterday I was at a presentation with a tick expert. So I got all of the up-to-date tick and tick-borne diseases of the Northeast information. We actually talked quite a lot about that. And I'm familiar with the hypothesis. It comes from Dr. Tal Levi at Oregon State University. It's very, very fantastic idea for sure. And I think to really answer the question, what it really is going to depend on is all of you. As you saw with that example in Mumbai, it is possible for some large predators to live very close to human landscapes. And we do see some stuff that is similar with cougars. And it's led to this myth that they're just naturally really good at living alongside people. And that's not really the case. They can be very good at living alongside people, but what matters is human tolerance. And so that is the key, is that there needs to be people meeting halfway, taking that initiative to really say, we want these animals on the landscape and we're okay with having these animals on the landscape. And then you can really start having that conversation. But yes, I think it's a fantastic idea, not just from tick-borne diseases, but as I mentioned, vehicle collisions and other things. And the deer population it is unnaturally high. There are more white-tailed deer in this country than when Columbus arrived. That's a lot. And it's mainly due to the fact that you have gotten rid of large predators in a great portion of their range.
Thank you so much.
You had a question in the chat asking, are wildlife trailways helpful to improve populations and ranges?
So wildlife trails are fantastic. And this was something that I did not touch on in this presentation, but what is a concern with conservation is not just protecting species where we have them, but also connectivity. So we have great protected areas that house many large species, but there's not a lot of protected areas that have good connectivity for gene flow, for example. So it's something that we worry about in terms of inbreeding, where if more closely related individuals start breeding with each other, then harmful genes are going to pop up that are going to cause bad mutations and the population could crash. And so we want to avoid that. But to have good connectivity, you're going to have to go through human-dominated landscapes. And so all of the wildlife corridor initiatives that you're seeing for having corridors that go over or under major highways, or trails going through neighborhoods that are good quality habitat that animals would rather use than walking down the street or on the sidewalk. Those are fantastic. And we really need to be pushing and moving towards having a lot more of those across the entire landscape, especially in these urban and suburban environments.
Anyone else have a question for Dominic? Yeah. All right. Well, Dominic, thank you so much for enlightening us tonight. And thank you to GOMI and to John for setting this up. It's really nice to see someone from our own community going out in the world and bringing back really important information and doing really important work. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, have a nice night.
Good job, Dom.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So much.